He laughed at her credentials, he questioned her presence, but Jasmine Crockett turned the courtroom upside down. With pure legal precision, the courtroom smelled faintly of varnish, and old paper fluorescent lights buzzed above, barely drowning out the creak of wooden benches and the occasional cough from the gallery. People shifted, whispering. A high-stakes case was about to begin, and the Judge Burton Keeley had already made up his mind about one thing: this young woman walking in heels, clicking confidently, didn't belong in his courtroom. Jasmine Crockett had heard that sound before, that subtle scoff, that almost inaudible laugh from someone in power who thought they had her figured out, dismissed her before a single word left her mouth. But this one hit a little differently. Maybe it was the arrogance in the judge's face. Maybe it was the way he barely glanced up when the clerk called her name. Either way, it rolled off her like sweat in July. She stepped up to the defense table and dropped her case files in front of her client, 22-year-old Rashad Bellamy. He looked young, too young to have seen what he saw the night of the protest. His hoodie sagged on his thin frame. His mother sat 2 rows behind them, hands clasped tight in her lap, eyes already glistening. "You ready?" Jasmine whispered, leaning in close to Rashad. He gave the slightest nod, not from confidence, but fear. His jaw clenched, his fingers twitched. She touched his arm gently. "I need you calm. I've got this. Look at me. This isn't about their story, it's about ours." Jasmine stood, smoothed the front of her navy blazer, and glanced up at Judge Keeley. His eyes were already drifting back to the prosecutor, Bryce Hollowell, who was polishing his opening statement like a man preparing for a coronation. "Let's begin," Keeley muttered, barely disguising his boredom. "Prosecution opening remarks." Bryce stood with a rehearsed smile, tall, neatly groomed, and smug as ever. He looked directly at the jury, not even acknowledging Jasmine's presence. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a simple case," he began, voice slow and deliberate. "A young man caught in a chaotic scene chose violence over peace. Officers instructed him to leave. He refused. He resisted. He assaulted. He made choices, and now he must face the consequences." He glanced toward Jasmine, once offering her the kind of smile that asked, "You really think you can win this?" Jasmine stared back, unblinking. Bryce wrapped up quickly, confident that his tone alone had already swayed the jury. Keel gave a half-nod defense. She stood slowly. The courtroom fell quiet, not out of respect, but expectation, waiting to see if she'd fumble. "My client," she said calmly, "was at a protest that turned violent, but he did not bring violence. He recorded it. He spoke out, and for that he was grabbed, thrown down, handcuffed, and arrested without cause." She turned toward the jury, 12 strangers looking back at her, some doubtful, some curious, one or two already sympathetic. "Rashad is not a symbol. He is a person, and what happened to him is bigger than just this courtroom. It's about truth and what we allow those in power to get away with when they stop seeing the people they're supposed to protect." She didn't shout, didn't wave her arms. She just spoke, clear, precise, measured. Judge Keeley leaned back in his chair, studying her, now not laughing. As she sat back down, she whispered again to Rashad, "That's how we start." But the room didn't stay still for long. The prosecution was just getting warmed up, and the next move would threaten to tear Jasmine's case apart. 2 weeks before the trial, Jasmine had been sitting at her modest office in South Dallas, sipping lukewarm coffee and scrolling through a list of cases. The headlines were all the same: more arrests, more protests, more families left in shock. She wasn't looking to take on anything new. She was already overloaded. Then came the knock. It was Rashad's mother, Naomi Bellamy. She came in alone, wearing a faded green jacket and holding a crumpled manila envelope, like it was holding her son's freedom inside. She didn't speak at first, just handed Jasmine the envelope and waited. Inside were pictures, scrapes on Rashad's face and arms, bloodstains on his hoodie, a citation for obstruction of justice, and a grainy photo of him kneeling on the sidewalk, with 2 officers pinning him down. The timestamp read 6:42 p.m. on the evening of the Spring Valley protest. Jasmine looked up. Was he involved in any of the violence? Naomi shook her head. He was recording. He never even shouted back. He just kept filming. I was on the phone with him, heard everything. Jasmine leaned back, eyes scanning the evidence again. Naomi's voice cracked. "Please, he's a good kid. He wants to be a teacher. He volunteers at the rec center. He didn't do anything wrong." That part was always the hardest. Seeing a parent trying to keep themselves together while begging someone to see their child is more than a booking number. Jasmine knew this wouldn't be an easy case. Not in Dallas, not with Judge Keeley, not with Bryce Hollowell across the aisle, known for pushing maximum sentences, even in petty cases. But she took it anyway. The protest had started peacefully, organized in the wake of a police shooting in Mesquite. Hundreds had gathered at Fair Park with signs, chants, and cameras. Rashad had been toured The front live streaming on Instagram. Talking calmly about change, about fear, about his younger cousin who cried every time he saw a cop car. Then something shifted. A scuffle broke out on the far side of the park. Someone threw a bottle. Officers rushed in with riot gear. Tear gas canisters popped like firecrackers. People screamed, scattered. Rashad stayed. The footage showed him stepping back, phone still up, saying, "I'm not moving. I'm not doing anything wrong." Then a hand reached out. The phone hit the ground. The screen went black. That video went viral, but only in a few circles. It didn't make the news. It wasn't enough to stop the arrest from happening, but it was enough for Jasmine. She called in a favor from a friend at the ACLU who helped her track down witnesses. One was a school nurse named Deanna Qualls who had shielded 2 kids during the chaos. She remembered Rashad clearly, said he helped guide people out through a side gate. Another was a teenager named Kamari who had been standing beside Rashad when he got arrested. He still had the bruises from being shoved. Jasmine spent nights reviewing footage frame by frame. She made a timeline. She identified officers by badge number. She cross-referenced police reports with video. What she found were inconsistencies. Reports that claimed Rashad had thrown something, none of which was supported by any footage. 2 officers listed him wearing different clothes. A third claimed he had verbally threatened law enforcement. There was no audio to support that. Back in her office, Jasmine looked across at Rashad. It was their first real sit down before trial. He sat with his arms folded tightly, eyes scanning the floor. "I'm not good at talking," he muttered. "What if I mess up in there?" "You won't," she said. "And if you freeze, I'll carry it. You're not on trial for being perfect. You're here because someone didn't like that you had a camera and the courage to keep it up." Rashad looked at her for the first time. "You really think we can win?" "I think if we don't try, they keep doing it." But Jasmine knew this wasn't just about one kid. It was about the system that was used to getting away with steamrolling anyone who spoke up, and the system wasn't going down without a fight. The second day of the trial opened with a different energy. Judge Keeley came in 15 minutes late, muttering something about traffic. The courtroom was packed more than yesterday. Word had spread. Some local college students sat in the back row whispering about Jasmine's cross-examinations from previous cases. Rashad glanced at them, eyes wide. Jasmine leaned over. "Don't get distracted," she whispered. "This isn't a show, it's your life." Bryce Hollowell stood up looking far too confident. He called his first witness, Officer Clay Ronan. Ronan had the build of a man who wanted to be feared. Square jaw, thick neck, crisp uniform. As he walked to the stand, Jasmine noticed a small smirk on his face, like he already knew he was going to win. "Officer Ronan," Bryce began, "can you tell the court what you witnessed the night of March 12th? Ronan nodded, settling into his story like he'd told it a dozen times already. "There was a lot of yelling. Things started to turn violent. I saw the defendant in the middle of the street. He refused our orders to disperse and began shouting aggressively. At one point, I believed he was reaching for something, and I made the decision to detain him." Jasmine scribbled something on her notepad. Rashad leaned toward her. "He's lying, I know," she muttered, "but let him talk." Bryce continued, painting Rashad as someone who escalated the situation, someone who posed a threat to public safety. The story was clean, rehearsed, and conveniently skipped any reference to the footage. When Jasmine finally stood for cross-examination, the air shifted again. She walked slowly, arms folded, and looked directly at Ronan. "Officer Ronan, you said my client was shouting aggressively. Can you recall exactly what he said?" Ronan blinked. "He was yelling to the crowd, riling people up." "That's not what I asked. What exactly did he say?" A pause. "I don't remember the words, but the tone." She cut in. "You arrested someone for tone." Bryce stood, objection, argumentative. Keeley nodded, sustained. "Stick to questions, Miss Crockett." She turned back. "Officer, are you aware that my client was live streaming during the protest?" Ronan shifted in his seat. "I heard something about that later." "Did you personally watch the video?" "No." "Interesting. So you filed a report stating that my client was aggressive and non-compliant, but never reviewed the video that captured the entire encounter." Another pause. "I stand by what I saw." Jasmine clicked her pen slowly. "That's funny, because we're going to play the video for the court in due time, and in it Rashad is clearly telling the crowd to stay calm, to step back, to leave. He's not yelling, he's not throwing anything, he's filming." Bryce objected again. Something about leading the witness. But Keeley waved it off this time. "Let her finish." Jasmine stepped closer. "Officer, you stated in your report that my client was wearing a red sweatshirt, correct?" "Yes." She held up a printed still from the video. "What color sweatshirt is he wearing?" "Here." Black. Silence. She turned toward the jury. "Black, not red. And yet you wrote red in your official statement. Can you explain that?" "I must have mixed up details. It was chaotic." She nodded. "Of course, but you remembered his tone. You remembered him reaching you. Remembered enough to detain him." Jasmine let the words hang in the air, then turned away, nothing further. As she sat back down, Rashad leaned toward her again. I didn't think he'd fold like that. He didn't fold, she said. He cracked. We just started chipping. But she knew this wasn't enough, not yet, because Bryce wasn't done, and his next witness would force Jasmine to face something she didn't see coming. Bryce called his next witness Sergeant Leonora Vance, a veteran officer with 25 years in the department. She walked to the stand with quiet confidence. Her uniform was pressed metal shining. The jury sat up straighter. Even Jasmine felt a shift. This woman knew how to command a room. Sergeant Vance. Bryce began. Were you present at the Spring Valley protest? Yes, I was part of the response team stationed at the south end of the park. And did you observe the defendant during that time? I did. He was in the street yelling. I remember thinking he was drawing a lot of attention. Did he comply with orders to disperse? No, in fact, he seemed defiant. He didn't run like the others. He stood his ground. That's why Officer Ronan detained him. Bryce smiled, turning to the jury. No further questions. Jasmine stood slowly. This wasn't going to be about exposing lies. Vance wouldn't lie, but she might leave things out. Sergeant, you said Rashad, my client, stood his ground. Did he threaten anyone? No, but in moments like that, threats aren't always verbal. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. Understood. And did you see him physically assault anyone? No. Did he throw anything? No. Did he block officers from detaining anyone else? No. Did he film you? Vance hesitated. Yes. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Was that illegal? No. She took a step closer. So just to be clear, a young man stood on a public sidewalk, didn't throw anything, didn't hurt anyone, didn't interfere, but got arrested. Why? Vance straightened. Because he refused to leave. We gave multiple warnings. Jasmine walked back toward the defense table, thinking, what were those warnings exactly? Disperse immediately or face arrest. Was that broadcast? Yes. Through loudspeakers. Jasmine turned. And can you hear that broadcast in the body cam footage? Vance blinked. I don't recall. I do, Jasmine said, flipping through her notes. You can't, because the footage shows officers talking calmly near the fountain. No loudspeaker, no broadcast, just an officer saying he's still filming. Let's get him. Do you remember that line? Bryce objected. Irrelevant. Keeley looked annoyed. Overruled. Vance shifted again. I don't recall that statement. Jasmine handed the court clerk a small flash drive. Then let's watch it. The footage played. The courtroom went silent. It showed exactly what Jasmine described. Calm officers, then a sudden decision to grab Rashad. While he was focused on filming, no warnings, no escalation, just a command and a takedown. When the video ended, Jasmine looked at Vance. Does that refresh your memory? Vance hesitated. It's not the full story, no, but it's the part they never wanted shown. She paused, then added, Sergeant, I'm not here to attack you, but your words carry weight. And when they don't match the truth, people like Rashad lose years of their lives. Vance didn't respond. Nothing further. The room was quiet. Even Judge Keeley stared ahead without his usual disinterest. Bryce had no redirect. Vance stepped down quietly. During the break, Jasmine walked outside for air. Rashad followed, staying a step behind her. You really think that video helped? I think it shook them. That's the start. He nodded slowly, shoulders still tight. I didn't expect them to be so confident lying like that. They're not lying. She said they believe what they did was right. That's why it's so dangerous. Rashad stared out at the courthouse lawn. What if the jury still doesn't care? Jasmine looked him straight in the eye. Then we give them something they can't ignore, and that something was coming next. A piece of evidence Jasmine hadn't revealed, yet one that would turn the trial completely upside down. By the fourth day, the courtroom felt different. The jury was paying attention. Now really paying attention. Jasmine noticed it in their eyes and the way they followed her every move. Even Judge Keeley, who had once barely looked up from his bench, now sat with his hands folded, listening more carefully than he had all week. Jasmine waited for Bryce to finish a limp redirect with another officer, then stood, voice calm. And even, Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce a new exhibit, body cam footage. Officer Bennett, time stamped 6:36 p.m., March 12th. Bryce turned sharply. Objection, Your Honor, this footage wasn't disclosed until this morning. It was obtained late yesterday, Your Honor. Jasmine replied, it falls within the discovery deadline, and it directly contradicts previous testimony. Keeley glanced between them. Bryce looked nervous for the first time. I'll allow it, Keeley said. Finally, Jasmine handed the flash drive to the clerk, who loaded it on the screen. The lights dimmed. She stood just behind the jury box, hands folded. The video played. It began with chaos, people running, shouts in the background, police yelling commands. Officer Bennett was standing near a patrol car, recording everything as it unfolded. In the middle of the screen, Rashad could be seen calmly walking backward, phone in hand. Then came the voices, clear, unmistakable. There's that kid again, same one from the last protest, still filming. A second voice replied, yeah, He posts that stuff online. You want me to grab him? Let's just shut that down. Tired of the cameras, the video cut forward Bennett moving quickly toward Rashad, who was saying, I'm just filming, man, I have a right. And then it happened. They took him down. No warning, no announcement. Just forced. Jasmine paused the footage there. She turned to the jury. You just heard officers discussing not a threat, not a weapon, but a camera. You heard them decide, without legal grounds, to shut that down. This wasn't about safety. It was about control. Bryce shifted in his seat. Jaw tight, he scribbled something on a legal pad, but didn't stand to object. There was nothing to say. Jasmine continued, the Constitution doesn't take a day off, and our rights don't disappear. When someone in a uniform gets uncomfortable, she looked at the judge, and for the first time, he didn't look away. Outside the courthouse, Naomi Bellamy clutched her coat tighter. She hadn't expected the courtroom to feel like this, so tense, so deliberate. She'd imagined it would be like TV, quick, clear, obvious, but this was slow, emotional, ruthless. Inside, Jasmine called her final witness, Deanna Qualls, the school nurse who had been at the protest with her teenage daughter. Deanna sat straight in the chair, her voice a steady. I saw him. She said that young man didn't do anything wrong. He helped my daughter. When people started running, pulled her out of the way, told her to get behind the wall and wait for the gas to clear. Did you see him attack anyone? Jasmine asked. No. Did he yell, threaten, throw anything? Not once. Did you hear any dispersal orders? Not clearly, just a lot of shouting. Did he look scared? Deanna looked at Rashad. Yes. But he didn't run. He stayed calm. As Deanna stepped down, Jasmine turned to the jury. This case is about more than a protest. It's about what happens when the truth isn't convenient for those in power, when the person holding the camera becomes more dangerous than the person holding the weapon. The room was still. Eve and Keeley hadn't written anything down, and for the first time in the trial, Bryce didn't request a recess, but Jasmine knew better than to get comfortable, because the closing arguments would decide everything. And she had one last card to play. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett stood in front of the mirror in the courthouse restroom, adjusting her earrings with steady hands, but inside her mind was buzzing. Closing arguments were less about the facts and more about conviction, not just what the jury saw, but what they felt. And she knew she had to land every word. Back in the courtroom, Judge Keeley looked more awake than usual. The bailiff called for silence. This was it. Bryce went first. He tried to regroup, tried to sweep the body cam footage under the rug. With polished language and hypotheticals, ladies and gentlemen, he said, pacing like a man stalling for time. This case isn't about filming, it's about order. The officers were under immense pressure. They had to make split-second decisions. And yes, maybe things weren't perfect, but Rashad Bellamy was in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the wrong thing. He gestured toward the jury. This wasn't personal. It was procedural. Jasmine watched them. They weren't fighting now. It was her turn. She stepped forward, but didn't stand behind the podium. She stood directly in front of the jury box, calm, still, honest, procedural. She echoed softly, that's a nice word. It makes everything sound clean, professional. But what you saw wasn't procedure, it was punishment. She turned to Rashad. He sat quietly, hands folded, looking far smaller than when this all started. That young man didn't scream. He didn't throw a punch. He didn't even flinch when officers rushed him. He stood his ground and exercised a right that we all say we value: freedom of speech, the freedom to document, the freedom to witness. She walked the length of the jury box. You saw the footage. You heard the words, shut that down, not because he was dangerous, but because he was inconvenient. She let that hang in the air for a moment. My client wasn't arrested because he broke the law. He was arrested because someone didn't want him to show what the law looked like that day. A man on the jury, a mechanic from Garland, if she remembered right, shifted in his seat, eyes narrowed in thought. This isn't about protest. It's not about a hoodie. It's not about attitude. It's about truth and whether or not we as a society punish people for telling it. She stopped, looked every juror in the eye one by one. Make no mistake, you're not just deciding Rashad's future, you're deciding what kind of justice system we live under, one that defends power or one that defends people's silence. Even Judge Keeley didn't shift in his seat. Thank you, she said quietly, and returned to her chair. The courtroom recessed for deliberation. Jasmine stepped into the hallway where Naomi waited. Her face was pale. You think they heard you? She asked. I think they felt it, Jasmine said. Hours passed. Jasmine didn't sit. She paced outside the courtroom, tapping the back of her phone against her palm. Rashad and his mother sat on the bench, heads close. Reporters loitered in the corner. Everyone waited. Then the bailiff opened the door. We have a verdict. Back inside, the tension was sharp. Jasmine's throat tightened. She told herself to breathe. She didn't. The four-person stood in the matter of the state of Texas versus Rashad Bellamy. We find the defendant not guilty on all counts. Naomi gasped. Rashad blinked, unsure if he heard it right. Jasmine closed her eyes for half a second, just long enough to let the pressure slip off her shoulders. Keeley looked down at his notes. Then, unexpectedly, he glanced at Jasmine. Miss Crockett, he said slowly, the court appreciates your conduct throughout this trial. Your arguments were thorough. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. But while the verdict was in, the impact of this case was far from over, because what Jasmine did in that courtroom would reach far beyond those walls. The steps outside the Dallas County Courthouse were crowded. Activists, students, church members, even a few off-duty teachers. Word had spread quickly. Rashad Bellamy was free, not guilty. The kid with the camera, the quiet one in the hoodie, had stood his ground in court and walked away cleared of every charge. Jasmine stood a few feet back, watching him speak to a local reporter. He stumbled over his words, nervous but honest. I just wanted people to know what really happened. I didn't think it had turned into all this. Naomi stood beside him, gripping his hand like she might never let go again. Jasmine didn't step into the camera frame. This wasn't her moment. She'd had enough of those already. Instead, she scanned the crowd, then the courthouse windows above. Somewhere up there, Judge Keeley was probably watching, maybe thinking through what he'd witnessed in his own courtroom. It wasn't just about Rashad. It never had been. This case cracked open a conversation that so many had tried to ignore. Later that night, Jasmine returned to her office. She kicked off her shoes, let the silence settle. On her desk was a small envelope, no return address. Inside, a simple card with handwriting that read, "You didn't just defend him, you defended all of us. Thank you." There was no name, but she didn't need one. A week later, she spoke at a panel in San Antonio. Half the room was filled with young law students fresh out of school, eager to make a difference. One asked her, "What do you do when the judge laughs at you, when they don't take you seriously?" Jasmine smiled softly. "You don't change who you are. You sharpen your tools, you let them laugh, and then you make them listen." There were nods. Some wrote it down, some just sat with it. After the panel, one girl approached her. "I watched the Rashad trial online. I'm going into civil rights law because of you." Jasmine thanked her, but didn't linger. Impact wasn't always loud. A few days later, she visited Naomi and Rashad at their house in Oak Cliff. Naomi cooked dinner. Rashad showed her the college applications he'd started filling out again. She noticed the shift in him, less weight on his shoulders, more certainty in his steps. At one point, he asked, "Do you think it's over?" She thought about it. "No, not even close. But we made noise, and now they know we're not backing down." That night, walking back to her car, Jasmine sat for a long time in the driver's seat before starting the engine. She looked up at the moon above the power lines, thought about every case she'd taken over the years, the ones she lost, the ones that nearly broke her, and the ones like this, rare, exhausting, necessary. She didn't do it for headlines or praise. She did it because somebody had to. Because silence was too expensive, and because every time she walked into a courtroom, she remembered what it felt like to be doubted. The next morning, her phone rang. Just after sunrise, a new number, a new case. She let it ring once, twice, then picked up Crockett Law, because the fight goes on and justice doesn't stop when the courtroom empties, and neither does she if you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, even when they laugh at you. Subscribe to this channel. There are more stories coming, more voices to amplify, and more justice to fight for. When they laugh at you, don't shrink, sharpen. Jasmine Crockett didn't win this case because she was the loudest in the room. She won because she was the most prepared, the most principled, and the most unshakable in her pursuit of truth. This story isn't just about Rashad Bellamy. It's about every person who's been silenced, dismissed, or disrespected because they dared to tell the truth or dared to document it. So to every student of the law, every activist with a camera, every young person who's ever been told to sit down and be quiet, keep standing, keep filming, keep fighting. Because real justice doesn't come easy. It comes from people who refuse to give up, even when the system tells them they've already lost. Let this remind you, you don't need permission to do what's right. You just need courage, preparation, and the will to see it through. Subscribe. Stay engaged, because there are more voices to raise, more cases to fight, and the next one might need you.